Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to just wait a few minutes to make sure everyone has a chance to log on, and we'll start right around 11:02. So thanks for joining us. So good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for a little bit more of an in-depth look at some highlights from our February 2026 policy packet, as well as our special response to immigration enforcement packet, which was released in January. Next slide, please. So let's first take a look at our agenda for today. We'll start with some housekeeping and presenter introductions. Then we'll do what we call our fun practice poll, and then we'll do a formal poll number one. Then we'll have an update about Gamut overview and some updates to Gamut, as well as just some general good pointers about how to access your policies in Gamut. We will then get into the heart of the discussion about the policy updates with time for questions and answers. Then we'll have our second kind of what we call a formal poll. And then where you'll hopefully evaluate us so that we can continue to serve you well and continue to improve our efforts. And then there will be some time, hopefully, for additional questions at the end. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about housekeeping. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. You can see from the visual diagram where that is, where the feature is. And please know the chat feature has been turned off. And we'll either answer your questions in that Q&A feature itself in writing, or our presenters will, in live time, answer the questions. And please know in advance so you don't have to worry about too many notes, or if you're not going to get it, you will receive a link to this video of the webinar itself, as well as the slide deck that we're using for our presentation. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to introduce all of the wonderful peers that I have that will be presenting. We'll start with Kristin Lindgren-Bruzzone, who's our General Counsel, Dana Scott, who's Associate General Counsel, Megan Russell, who's a Senior Policy Manual Writer, Dustin Bindreiff, who's also a Senior Policy Manual Writer, Ray Purcell, who's a Governance Technology Specialist, and then myself, I'm Barbara Laifman. I'm the Director of Policy Manual Development. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with our fun practice poll, just to kind of make sure we all have the hang of it. And the question is, what is your favorite Valentine gift? So you can choose candy, flowers, card, or I prefer a stuffed animal. So why doesn't everyone take a few? Maybe we'll take 10, 15 seconds, and then we'll look at what the responses are. Okay, thank you. And so, Shay, is it possible to show what the results are? And there we go. So it looks like the preference is flowers, followed by candy, cards, and then just a few people who enjoyed stuffed animals. Well, thank you. It's always fun to start that way before we get on to our next more formal poll, which isn't difficult either, but we're glad everyone now has the hang of it. So next slide, please. So this poll has two parts. It's really composed, for us to learn more about who's attending. We do this with each webinar because, like I said, we want to try to keep our focus accurate on who is attending so that it can be the most helpful. So the first part is, have you previously attended one or more policy update webinars? And you can choose, no, this is my first one. Yes, I've previously attended one or two. Or three, yes, I've previously attended three or more. Then the second part is, what is your role in your district or county office of education? Board member is the first, superintendent or administrator is the second, executive assistant is the third, or the last would be other if it doesn't fall into any of those other categories. So we'll take just a few seconds again, and then we'll look at our results. Okay, so let's see where we're at with the results. Okay, so it looks like, well, it's pretty close. The majority is people who have attended one or two. No, actually, even higher is attended three or more. So that's great that we're having so many repeat people between one or two or three or more. It's a large majority. It's what would that be? Close to 70%. And then 29% that it's your first time. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you find it helpful, and then you'll fall into the other categories the next time. What is your role in your district or county office? Oops, we didn't get to that one yet, Shay, the results from that. Okay, there we go. So executive assistants, about half. And then about 23% are board members and 15% superintendent or other administrators. Okay, great. That's really good information for us to have. And thank you for participating in the poll. Okay, and we will move on now to the next slide, please. So I'm now going to introduce Ray, who's going to talk a little bit about Gamut and accessing the update packets in Gamut.
Hello everyone, my name is Ray. I'm a governance technology specialist here, and we're going to talk all about using Gamut to access the update packets. Can we go ahead and look at the next slide, please? All right, there are a couple of different ways to access the CSBA update packets. Whether your LEA has access to Gamut Policy Plus or just Gamut Policy, we will look at where to find those update packets in either site. As well, the update packets are separated between the district policies and the COE policies, so we will look at where those both are. With this slide here, we can see the view from the Gamut Policy site, which will be for those districts with just the Gamut Policy subscription. To get to this area on the policy site, first you will log in. Then you will see the policies drop-down menu here, and from this drop-down you will select policy updates. Then on the left sidebar there, you can see the update packets are sorted in a chronological order by year on the left. On the screen we can see guide sheets and update packets. You're free to click into those documents that you are looking for at the moment. Next slide, please. Sorry, did we go to the next slide? Yeah, okay, great. For the COEs that are logging to the Gamut Policy site, your view will be slightly different. You will see the county update packets. The process to get to these packets is the same, however. You will sign in and then use the Policies drop-down menu to select Policy Updates, and then make sure that you are clicked into the correct year on the left, and locate the specific packets and documents that you are looking for. Next slide, please. If your LEA has a subscription to Gamut Policy Plus, then you will still use the Policies dropdown on your Gamut site, but here you will select CSBA Communications, and we can see on this screenshot that once you are clicked into this page, you will want to be clicked into the CSBA Policy Updates tab on the left, and then you can see the update packets to the right organized by month and year, with the most recent on top. To get into that update packet, just click on the title and you will enter the update packet, which has all of the updated policies and all of the supporting documents that accompany the packet, such as the guide sheet, checklist, and mandated list. This page also has the Copy All Documents button, which allows you to pull the whole packet into your work in progress area for editing. Next slide, please. For COEs with Gamut Policy Plus, the process will be largely the same, except you will notice on the left there it says County Office of Education Policy Updates, and this is where those packets exist for COEs. The district and COE update packets do come out on different dates. Often the COE update packets will come out approximately 1 week after the district update packets. All LEAs designated Gamut contacts will receive an email when their policy update type is posted on Gamut. Next slide, please. The Gamut Spring webinar series has returned. The first one will be held at 11 a.m. on March 26th, and the topic is managing quarterly update releases and kind of how to do that. More in depth, of course, like using the editor and such within the Gamut Policy Plus site. If you're interested in registering for this webinar, you can visit csba.org/webinars or look for the link on that page. If you're interested in the recordings for any of our previous Gamut webinars, please reach out to us at gamut@csba.org. Next slide, please. We host weekly drop-in sessions every Wednesday at 2 p.m. where subscribers can come to ask our Gamut support team technical questions and receive live assistance. So sometimes we have presentations at those, such as if we have a new feature, we will do a presentation at a drop-in session, but most of the time and for the foreseeable drop-in sessions, they are just places where you guys can come and ask us questions and receive support. You may register to join one of these sessions at csba.org/webinars. Next slide, please. If you find that your LEA is behind on the updates to your manual, we have a couple of different options to support you in getting caught up. We offer a policy manual review and a policy development workshop. The policy manual review is an audit where our policy team will issue you a report of which policies need updating based on CSBA's most recent updates of those policies. The policy development workshop is a more intensive process where one of our policy manual consultants will travel to your LEA and work with your team to go through and develop your board policy manual so that it is fully updated and is customized to fit the needs of your organization. Next slide, please. Gamut offers Policy Plus, but we also offer Gamut Meetings, which is a module that can slot right into your existing Gamut Policy Plus site and allow your organization to build and manage your board meeting agendas within the one Gamut site. There is also cohesion between the Gamut Policy Plus module and the Gamut Meetings module that allows you to easily pull current and draft policies into your board meeting agendas for review. There are many other features in the module as well, but one other feature that speaks to the connection between the meetings and the policy module is the search feature, which allows your organization to search through all of the data within all of your agendas and your entire board policy manual with one search bar, since all of the data is, of course, stored in that one site. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ray. And we will move forward now. So we're going to first start by talking a little bit of just about some general principles underlying our policies. So next slide, please. So just a few things to know. So when we think of water board policies, they are a way which the board can articulate the direction of the district or the county office of education. And it's kind of the way that the board legislates, sets the framework. Then we have administrative regulations, which provide the necessary details and ways to implement the board policy. Just need to make sure that they're not inconsistent with the applicable BP, and of course, they need to be within the confines of the law. Just keep in mind for county offices, the structure is a little bit different, especially where the county superintendents are elected because of the different dynamic and relationship between the county board and the county superintendent. Then we also have exhibits. These can be very helpful tools. They provide forms, notices, and other implementation devices which relate and are specific to the policy or the regulation that it's related to, and they can be very helpful in implementation. And then we have board bylaws, which are basically board policies that provide the rules and procedures that govern the board itself and that the board itself must follow. Please know that policies, we use this term sometimes in a general sense to refer to any of these four documents. So, and maybe you guys do too in your districts and county offices. So please know, at least during this webinar, that if we say policy, it might be referring to a specific document or to all that might be within a certain number of that policy. Next slide, please. So just to keep in mind and to get a general framework, so our sample policies fall within a numbering system, and it ranges from the zeros to the 9,000s. We have a gap for 8,000 on purpose, just in case we need to add. And let's see what else to point out. So in the 2000s, only applicable to districts. And again, this is because of the different dynamics between the superintendent and the county board of education in most counties, because this is the policies that focus on administration. And then the 4,000s can get a little tricky because we have three different, well, sometimes we have a 4,000 version, which applies to all types and classifications of staff. We also have some that are unique to certificated, classified, and managerial. That would be 4,100, 4,200, and 4,300. And sometimes these can be double coded, where for two classes of employees, the same language would apply. Sometimes triple coded, where it applies to all three classes. And sometimes we need to have them separated out for each class. We have lots and lots of policy documents, over 800 in our manual. And in terms of code numbers, because remember, most of them have more than just a BP or just an AR. There are 550 plus code numbers in our sample policy list. Okay, so next slide, please. Always important to keep in mind that our policies are samples and they serve as a starting point for your district or county office of education. And then the expectation is that your district or county office will review and update the policies and within the confines of the law and customize them to the needs and context of the district or county office. And this is one of the most important responsibilities of the board. And it can really be a fun, creative, and unique process to customize them based on your district or county office's unique needs, as well as things that you might really want to highlight and or explore in the future. So it can be, I know it sounds kind of silly, but it can really be fun and a creative endeavor. Please know that our policies do go through fairly extensive, or really, they do go through extensive legal review, but they do not constitute legal advice. Always best to consult your district or county office of education, legal counsel, or CSBA's legal services. And also, please keep in mind that the policies can become quickly out of date. As soon as legislation is passed, one that we just did the prior month could become outdated. We do try to anticipate the legislation that's coming down, but it's not a perfect system. And there's a lot of guidance coming down also at this point. So always important to check for the accuracy in terms of time. We have notes that are embedded to provide context and additional guidance. And the purpose of the notes is to assist with the language in the policy itself, but the notes should not be included when the policy is adopted. Next slide, please. So we're going to move on now to the heart of our conversation about some highlights from our February packet, as well as our special response to immigration enforcement packet. Next slide, please. So this slide shows which policies we'll be covering in the webinar from our February packet. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows which policies we will be covering from our response to immigration enforcement special packet. And actually, Shay, can you just go back one slide? I should have pointed out that it's also showing what topics we're highlighting. So we're going to be highlighting graduation requirements, adult-student interactions, and remote meetings and attendance. Thanks, Shay. Okay, so we can go 2 slides now. Thanks. And then these are the policies that were covered in our February packet, but we're not going to be covering in the webinar just due to time. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to introduce Dustin, who is going to discuss the policies related to graduation requirements.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you. Let's just jump into it. There's a number listed there, and I want to give a brief background and rationale of why we updated so many policies this packet. Next slide, please. The main rationale for these changing so many policies related to graduation requirements was the Education Code 512251 provision that offers certain populations of students a graduation exemption, and similarly, Education Code 51225.2, which has some pretty extensive requirements related to the transferability of coursework and credits for these populations. In particular here, what we did was these policies impact foster youth, students experiencing homelessness, current or former juvenile court students, children of military family, and students who are migratory. We group those under the collective term of highly mobile students, and we put all previously that information, those code informations about the exemption and transfer of credits, was spread across the unique policies for each of those students, as well as in graduation requirements. What we did is we moved all of that material to graduation requirements, so it'll be easier for you as districts and county offices to access and organize that information and keep it updated and current. So the graduation exemption for highly mobile students is now centrally located in BP 6146.1, and the transfer of coursework and credits for those highly mobile students is now in reciprocity of academic credit 6146.3. Next slide, please. There's a couple other changes related to high school graduation requirements I wanted to touch on, and then maybe I'll go over that exemption in a little more detail. In particular, AB 821 extended indefinitely the authorization for career and technical education to count towards the visual or performing arts or world language graduation requirements. We added a qualifier related to the graduation requirement for a course in ethnic studies because that is contingent on state funding. We added material related for the 2030-31 school year for the completion of a standalone one semester course in personal finance that can't be combined with any other course. Also, we clarified that the board is authorized to adopt a policy that exempts students from additionally locally adopted graduation requirements. And then again, we added all the detail and related material for that graduation exemption for highly mobile students to be exempted. In particular, what it exempts them from is from district adopted graduation requirements that are in addition to statewide graduation requirements. Next slide, please. 6146.3, reciprocity of academic credit. A couple major changes here in the regulation. We deleted it was a pretty old regulation, and so it required some pretty extensive updates, and part of that was deleting material related to different transfer of credits for accredited and non-accredited schools, since the state law and the BP require the acceptance of credits completed by students attending a public school, juvenile court school, or a non-public school or agency. And then again, we added the material related to requirements about transfer of coursework and credits for those highly mobile students is now all included in a section in that administrative regulation. So that's all centralized there. Next slide, please. Similarly, pretty quickly here, differential graduation and competence standards for students with disabilities. The first thing, we added the authorization for districts and COEs to exempt students with disabilities enrolled in grade 10 or higher in the 2022 or 23 school year. So now those students may be eligible for a similar graduation exemption. And then additionally, our major change was to expand the graduation exemption for eligible students with a disability that entered ninth grade in the 2022 or 23 school year. And this is a required exemption for those students. If they meet the requirements, they're required to receive it. And previously, that exemption was partially listed in this policy and partially in graduation requirements, and we centralized it all here, hopefully streamlining that as well for the districts. Next slide, please. So here you see the 5 policies where mostly what we did was remove that transfer and graduation exemption material. But there were a couple other changes I wanted to touch on. For 6173, we added material that reflects the requirements for districts and COEs that offer an intercession program to give priority access to students experiencing homelessness. For foster youth, 6173.1, we expanded the definition of foster youth to include youth who are detained in a juvenile court facility or are the subject of a court petition. And additionally, those students are required to get priority access for intercession programs. So while we did remove the graduation and transfer material from these, we did leave in the body, so you'll be able to see it in these policies, a cross-reference that the graduation materials is now in 6146.1 and that the transfer materials is in the reciprocity of academic credits. One last one real quick I wanted to share was next slide, please. Was an update to COE Board Policy 6186 about juvenile court schools. And this is a policy unique to county offices because they manage juvenile court schools. A couple significant changes there related to graduation requirements. We added the requirement that COEs collaborate with local probation departments to ensure access for students with a diploma or a certificate, to ensure they're getting access to post-secondary and career courses. And then also we added the requirement that these students receive that graduation exemption and the transfer of coursework and credit requirements we've discussed throughout this section. Next slide, please. Any questions, Barbara?
I don't see any questions that came in about graduation requirements. Let me just double check, Megan. I just want to double check that I'm not missing anything.
No, I don't think we have any questions coming yet, but just wanted to remind the attendees, if you have a question, you can drop it in the question and answer, and we will go ahead and answer those questions. And then we can also, if you have a question on this section, we can answer it later as well. So if you are listening to the presentation and think of something, don't hesitate to drop it in the Q&A box.
Exactly. Well put, Megan. Yeah, I was just going to say that we could always answer at the end on any of the topics that we're discussing. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, and now Megan is here. I'm going to hand it over to Megan to talk a little bit about adult-student interactions.
Thanks, Barbara. So I'll be talking about 2 policies that were updated. The first is 411921, professional standards, and the second one is 411924, maintaining appropriate adult-student interactions. Next slide, please. So by way of background, these were updated in response to SB 848, and that was a sweeping law that significantly broadened student safety and compliance obligations for districts. And interestingly, that law brought a lot of private schools in line with what are already being done at public schools. So when we were updating these policies, we just wanted to really think about in the back of our minds while we were updating these policies, the importance of districts when you are interviewing prospective employees, being informed about their previous actions or misconduct. And then also the importance of adults who are interacting with students to have appropriate training, and the consideration that schools should be a safe environment to students to learn. And of course, that policies can serve as a framework in the effort to keeping students safe. So next slide, please. So we updated board policy 4119.21, and there's actually 3 separate coded exhibits that are in conjunction with this policy, and they are 4119. Sorry, that's I think the next one actually. But there's 3 actually coded exhibits for this policy, and the first one is for classified employees, and that The second one is for certificate-dated employees, and the third one is for managerial employees. And that's kind of what Barbara was talking about before, that there can be different uh, policy numbers or exhibits depending on what type of employees that they apply to. And so this was kind of unique for our manual in that we don't often see one board policy number with three separate exhibits, but this is one of those. And the exhibits are reflecting the code of ethics for those individual um, types of employees. So we updated this policy first to add the philosophical paragraph that the board's desire to provide a safe and positive school environment that promotes learning, engagement, safety, and well-being of students, and also to expand on the expectations for employee conduct. And then importantly, we also updated this policy to reflect SB 848, and that law requires districts to adopt policy by July 1st, 2026. And those policies need to promote safe environments for student learning and engagement. And they specifically address professional boundaries and establish appropriate limits on conduct. And then we also clarified what constitutes employee inappropriate conduct. And then as well, we are cross-referencing this policy with the next policy that I will talk about. They're very related, interrelated policies. So when we do a policy manual update, we do try to look at policies and how they impact other policies within our manual. And this is something that we identified. If we were going to update this one, professional standards, we were going to need to update the next one, maintaining appropriate adult-student interactions. So if we can head to the next slide, that would be great. So we also updated this policy. And again, we said policy is now mandated. So as Barbara was talking about earlier, there's some policies that are optional. There's some policies that are mandated. This policy is mandated. It's required for districts to have in writing that by July 1st, 2026, as required by SB 848, a policy that promotes safe environments for student learning and engagement that expressly addresses professional boundaries and that establishes appropriate limits on conduct. So that's what we are addressing here in this policy. We also updated our policy to clarify for purpose of this policy when we're talking about employees within the context of this policy. We're also talking about interns, volunteers, contractors, and anybody else who may have an employment relationship with the district or COE, because this policy would apply to those individuals. And again, like we did in the other policy, we updated the philosophical paragraph to really emphasize the board's desire to provide a safe environment that promotes learning, engagement, of safety of students. And then we also added a new section related to violations of this policy. So if you have employees who violate this policy, we discussed about what could happen there. So we also updated the list of inappropriate employee conduct that was expanded. And we also clarified in relation to SB 848 that maintaining personal conduct with a student during or outside of the school day that has no legitimate educational purpose by phone, letter, text message, social media, internet platforms, or other means of communication without including the student's parent or guardian is an inappropriate employee conduct. So that was related directly to the requirements of SB 848 and language that districts are now required to have written in a policy. So that is what I have for those two policies related to adult-student interactions. If we can move to the next slide, and if there's any questions. I see there's a question whether there's three separate policies. There is one, Barbara, you can help me with this one too. It's triple coded. So they are the same language in the policy, but they are located at three different places within the manual because they apply to three different classes of employees. So technically, yes, there are three different policies in the manual.
Yeah, I think it's the easiest way to understand it, I think, is that it's one policy which applies to all three, like I explained at the beginning, all three classes of employees. So, in other words, we have one policy with the same language that would pertain to certificated staff, which would be the 4119.21, the classified staff, which would be the 4219.21, and the supervisory or managerial staff, which would be the 4319.21. Megan is correct that in Simbly, you will see them separated out as a 4119, 4219, 4319, but it is the same language. On the flip side, the exhibit for each of them is not the same language. The exhibit is separate and different for each of the classes. Does that clarify? I hope that clarifies the question. If it didn't, please
Maybe,
ask
Barbara,
again. Mhm.
does a board then adopt three policies or one policy? Would they do three adoptions
They
for
would,
something
they
like
could just
that?
adopt, okay, they could just adopt the one policy, but to make sure that it's appearing on their agenda as triple coded, that they're not just listing it as 4119.21, but that they're listing it as for 119.21, for 219.21, and for 319.21. And then they can adopt it in one fell swoop. The exhibits all should be adopted separately. So in other words, you could do one policy as long as you list all three, and you could do each exhibit separately.
Barbara, can I just make a comment? Some
Sure.
of the double or triple coded policies are different. So, for example, where the classified discipline policy is different than the certificated, even if they have the same number. So you want to make sure that if it is a different policy, that you're aware of that and going over it.
Correct. And in that case, we normally would not, we would give it a different, we wouldn't do it with the slashes. We would do it as a single coded document. This one is the most confusing of all of the policies in our manual because we have a policy which applies to all three, and we have an exhibit which needs to be adopted separately for each. But Kristin is right that it could have the same number, but it would be separate. That would be for a different policy in our manual, not this one. But Kristin's accurate that sometimes it will have the same number, but it's still single. It's not triple coded with the other ones. It's not triple coded or double coded.
Okay, and then I see there's another question, and whether this policy applies to volunteers and interns, and if there is language for volunteers and interns who violate the standards. And yes, for 4119.24, it does apply to volunteers and interns. And at the end, there's a new section called violations of policy. And it does state that volunteers or who violate the policy may be precluded from school grounds and activities, and that for employees, they may be subject to discipline up to and including dismissal. So it does apply, and then there are discussions of violations.
Yeah. And just in addition, since we're going to be, it's on our radar to be updating some other policies, the SB 848 is still in the works. We're still going to be in future packets, going to be updating policies to abide by SB 848, including like volunteer assistance and others. So this isn't the full comprehensive part of it, but we have a lot of the material, especially in 4119.24.
And then
So.
there's two related questions. Maybe we can just address these and before moving on to the next section. But two related questions is, can you approve the policy with its corresponding exhibits individually? And on the flip side, can you do three policies um, with attached exhibit?
Yeah, you can. I would just be as clear, just make sure in the agenda that you're very clear about what you're adopting. But yes, you could do 4119.21 with the exhibit to 4119.21. I would just make very clear in the agenda how you're doing it. Or like I said, you could adopt the board policy as one whole, as long as you spell out that it's for all three, and you could do each of the exhibits separately. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. So next slide, please. Okay, and thank you, Megan. I'm now going to present Dana, who is going to be discussing on remote meetings and attendance.
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Dana Scott. I am one of the Associate General Counsel here at CSBA, here to talk to you about some board bylaws, changes that were made to these bylaws, focusing. There are a lot of changes made, but focusing here on remote meetings and attendance, as we've seen some evolution in that area of the law. And the focus here really comes from SB 707, which we'll get into on the next slide. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the main spark for these changes was SB 707, which was a very large bill passed last fall and implemented this beginning of this year. And it had a lot of a wide array of changes to the Brown Act, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And if you're not, it's the Open Meeting and Transparency law related to public entities. And SB 707 brought, as I mentioned, a lot of changes. And you might hear things mentioned and think, oh, does that apply to LEAs? I haven't seen that in our board bylaws, in the sample policies. But not everything in SB 707 is applicable to LEAs. And so the changes made here really bring in and focus what SB 707 requires of LEAs. So with all that said, a particular emphasis was the importance of meeting options for board members. You can think back to the beginning of COVID when we really needed these remote meeting options. And following that time period, there were a lot of changes in the law to create and acknowledge different circumstances. You'll remember words possibly like just cause and emergency circumstances, and how is that different from an emergency meeting? So this bill really did some cleanup to kind of tidy up all the things we've seen come into play since those remote meeting options have really flourished. However, with all of that said, there's also the appropriate limitations and requirements to make sure that the intention and the integrity of the Brown Act to keep meetings open and public and engaging are still being fulfilled and met. So an evolution in the law based on an evolution in how we function as a society, right, with more electronic and online options, but with the intention to keeping public agencies and public entities meeting in an open and transparent way. So next slide, please. So with all of that said, starting with Board Bylaw 9320, this is the board bylaw that lays out different types of meetings that boards may have, and the notice requirements for each of those types of meetings to put the public on notice that it's going to be happening. One change that you'll see reflected in the board bylaw is the idea of what an emergency is. So emergency used to mean a state emergency. That can now be a local emergency as well. So giving more authorization for local control of situations happening at the local level to allow for those emergency meetings. Some other changes throughout this board bylaw to kind of tidy things up, acknowledging the law that is included in this bylaw, acknowledging again this idea of remote and electronic meetings, what that means and how it comes into play. Thinking along the lines of electronic meetings, how social media comes into the fold here. So a prohibition against any series of communications amongst a majority of board members in those online spaces. So thinking about liking things and emojis and comments and how that can cross over into being a meeting, and prohibiting against that and to avoid any Brown Act violations. And then notice requirements, again, being fine-tuned based on evolutions from SB 707 and other areas of the law. Next slide, please. Some more changes to 9320. You'll see in this the first sub bullet that there was some material pulled out of this board bylaw, but I want to emphasize that that information related to disability related accommodations has not been removed from board bylaws. It's just been removed from this one because it's covered elsewhere. So trying to streamline and clean things up a bit because that information can be found in 9322. And then notice requirements being updated as well. Again, evolution of our options, not just telephone options, but email options now as well. And then our big heavy hitter today would be pulling out all the information in 9320 related to remote meeting options and putting that into the new and improved 9320.1, which is going to be your one-stop shop for all remote attendance options. And I like to think of it as either like a menu of options or some buckets that we'll get into on the next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, so SB 707, as I mentioned, was a cleanup of a lot of different kinds of Brown Act things. The biggest lift, I think, applicable to LEAs is this remote meeting options. Again, that history of how these remote meetings options has evolved created, I think, a fair amount of confusion of what could be permitted when and what was required in each circumstance. Now we have a more clarity, and this board bylaw is a nice, tidy one-stop shop to find that clarity. So this information was pulled out of 9320, put into 9320.1, so you'll have both of them to cover all of the meeting and notice requirements. So the first option, before I get ahead of myself, importantly, in this board bylaw, it kicks off with a series of definitions, which are really handy when you're reading through this bylaw because I can think of various different phrases like electronic meetings, remote meetings, teleconferencing meetings, virtual meetings, online meetings. We have created a lot of different terms for ourselves as a society, and this bylaw acknowledges that we're gonna stick to one and stick to a series of them to kind of guide where this bylaw goes. And so that is a helpful place to start before you jump into this menu of options for remote meetings. The first option in that menu is the OG, I like to think of it as remote meeting option, which is good old teleconferencing. So in each option, it specifies and authorizes the use of this option. So use of teleconference as a remote meeting option is authorized. And then there's a series of requirements that have to be met when using that. So think a majority of the board members have to be within the district boundaries, notice and agenda posting requirements, all votes being taken by roll call, things of that nature are spelled out for each option. So after teleconferencing, we jump into remote meeting attendance for individual board members who have a disability that requires an accommodation. Some fun background, or maybe fun for me as an attorney, maybe not fun for you all, but I'll give it to you anyway. This was originally an attorney general opinion, came from an attorney general opinion, which doesn't hold like the same force as a law, a statute. However, it's guidance for how the AG thinks a court would come down on something like this. The legislature saw this attorney general opinion and said, we agree, we're going to put it into law. So now remote meetings can be a disability related accommodation. So that's authorized in this bylaw, and then a series again of requirements if that's going to be used. After that option, we jump down into just cause. Just cause has a series of different one definition for this permitted use of a remote meeting. So the bylaw spells out you may use remote meetings for a just cause, and here's what a just cause is. Importantly, just cause now includes something that we previously knew as a standalone option, which is emergency circumstances. So emergency circumstances are now considered a just cause, and they fall into the same bucket. This matters a lot because previously just cause and emergency circumstances had their own limit on how frequently they could be used by a board member. So now there's one big bundle with a limit on how frequently a board member can use their remote meeting option because of a just cause. And the bylaw outlines different options for how that limit can be placed based on how frequently the board meets. So you'll see an option spelled out there that you should select based on your board's frequency of meeting. And then last but not least, we've got emergency as a basis for remote meeting, authorizes it and gives it a list of requirements for when, how to use that option. And as mentioned on previous slides, this includes state and local emergencies. So lots to pick from here. It can feel really, really big when looking at it and hearing about it in this context, but I think it's a much more streamlined way of doing remote meetings. And again, an acknowledgement by the legislature of, hey, we kind of need to organize ourselves here for these meetings options. Next slide, please. Okay, and then last for me, 9322, I mentioned this board bylaw previously related to 9320 and said, this board bylaw covers some things, so we don't need to include it over in 9320. Some additional cleanup here for things of that nature. And the changes that we'll see here, I think fall into, again, two kind of buckets. One related to the public comment exception. This has been an exception that exists in certain circumstances. SB 707 implemented some additional restrictions on when that exception applies. And so the board bylaw now lays out, okay, you may use this public comment exception if the following are true. So it applies that limit in a very clear and direct way. And then some other items cleaned up and clarifications made about agenda requirements and discretion for how items are placed on the agenda and who can make those decisions. So, and then additionally, dissemination requirements for agenda materials. So lots of different changes amongst all of these board bylaws, but mostly just cleanup and implementation of SB 707 as things have evolved with public meetings. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Dana. So it looks like we do have a few questions. Okay. So I'll read them out. Okay, it says the new updates for teleconference do not address SB 707 provision 54953.8.6 regarding eligible subsidiary bodies. Do you expect to include this in board committees bylaw next packet? We do have a board bylaw on board committees. I could probably take this one, that it's something we will look into. It's on our radar. It's always hard to promise exactly when, but we'll look at the applicability of it, and it is on our radar. So please note. So thanks for the question, and that you have that concern, and it is something we will consider for the future. Dana, you can help with this one. What kind of documentation might be needed to show there is a local emergency?
I think it would need to be something that was put into the minutes of the board meeting. So it would need to be put on record of why the board is meeting before that option is used. And then any additional requirements are going to be spelled out in the board bylaw itself when using that option.
Okay, thanks. And then the third question, it says, could boards make their own rules about remote attendance that differ from what is in your sample policies and is permitted by SB 707?
I mean, if it's permitted by the law to be doing it, yes, these are, suggestions that can be modified. I would just encourage any modifications to be run by legal counsel, either the district's own or CSBA's legal services, because there have been so many changes lately. They just want certainty that the requirements of the Brown Act and open meeting laws are being met before any creation of their own options.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I think that does it for the questions on this topic. So thank you, Dana. And we will now move to the next slide, please, which is on our response to immigration enforcement special packet. And I'm going to introduce Kristin to go ahead with the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. We're almost afternoon, I guess. I'm Kristin Lindgren-Bruzzone. I'm CSBA's General Counsel, and going to talk to you today about our special immigration packet. And that's based on a few bills that were enacted in the last legislative session. So these are the policies that we're going to go over today. There are some additions to these policies and administrative regulations that are unrelated to immigration. Barbara will go over those, but mostly we will not focus on them heavily, and they're just in the slides so that you have the information. The real focus of the presentation is the immigration changes. Next slide, please. And I just want to note that I know there are a lot of questions out there still about immigration enforcement. We're really just focused on the policies today. We can't give legal advice or answer any hypothetical questions about what might happen. So we're just really focused on the policies. So if you have questions about the policies, we're happy to answer those. So I'm going to start with sort of the history and timeline of how we got here. So in 2017, the legislature passed and the governor signed AB 699. You may be familiar with that. Our own Patrick O'Donnell was a sponsor of that bill. And that bill enacted, among other things, Education Code 234.7, which required the Attorney General to publish model policy language, and that districts and county offices of education to adopt policies that were either equivalent to or the same as those model policies by July 1st, 2018. And CSBA updated its policies, and you all followed those rules. And then in December 2024, I think in anticipation of the new administration that would come in January 2025, the AG updated its model policy language on its own without any statutory direction, and stated that districts and county offices should update their policies by May 1st to reflect those changes, but there was no statutory requirement. Nonetheless, we did update our sample policies in line with those changes to the AG's model policy language from December 2024 and published those policies in March 2025. So we were pretty updated at that time, and then we got some new bills that we have updated. So we'll go to the next slide and we could talk about those. So there were two bills, AB 49 and AB 495, that basically have the same language for our purposes here. I think 495 had a few extra things. Based on the fact that 495 was chaptered later and some language in the bill about which bill becomes operative, AB 495 is the operative bill. We've gotten some questions about AB 49. All of the language in AB 49 is also incorporated into these policies because it is also in AB 495. So if you're concerned because you've heard about AB 49, no worries. We have incorporated that language. Just that AB 495 is technically the operative statute. It amended the education code that was enacted under AB 699 to require, once again, the AG to update its model policies by December 1st, 2025, and then for you all to update your policies to align with the new requirements of the statute and the AG's revised model policies by March 1st. And that's why we put out our special packet on immigration that we're talking about now, so that you would have it in time to update the policies by March 1st. The statute provides that the revised policies must be provided to the California Department of Education upon request. The California Department of Education has interpreted that as requiring all of you to upload the revised policies to an online portal on the website no later than March 1st, 2026. The link to that portal is in the sample policies, so you have that. You can also just Google it, and it's just a button that you click and you type in your district name and some other information and then upload the policies. There's no requirement of you proving who you are, so anyone can really upload anything. Not sure, how CDE plans to deal with that, but we do recommend complying with that requirement just because the statute provides that CDE can request them. So, of course, in January, we issued our updated sample policies to reflect these changes in statute and the updated model policy language from the Attorney General. Next slide, please. So one of the things that changed with the new bills and the AG model policy language is that some of it applies to employees. Prior law only applied to students. And so we had to move things around. As Barbara discussed, the way that the policies are numbered is based on factors like who they affect. So we have 4,000s are for employees, 5,000s are for students. And because prior law only impacted students and their families with respect to immigration enforcement, we had those requirements in BP and AR 5145.13 in the 5,000s. Because the statute now impacts both students and employees, it's not appropriate to put it in 4,000 either. So we moved it to the 1,000s and made it into BPAR 1445. There have been some questions about this. 5145.3 has been deleted. Our recommendation is not to use that anymore and to replace it with BPAR 1445. Of course, as both Barbara and Dana have noted, it's up to the districts to work with their legal counsel to decide how they want to do their policies, but this is how we have recommended the numbering at this point. So just note that for our purposes, on our sample policy, BPAR 1445 replaces 5145.13, and we will no longer be using or updating 5145.13. So that is just a change in where we are putting things in our policy manual. And 1445 is going to be the main source of information about immigration enforcement in your policy manual. So as we go through, you'll see that we reference it in many other related policies and just point back to it. Rather than duplicating the language in multiple policies that have similar subject matter, we thought it was more efficient, made more sense, was easier, avoided conflicts and having to update every policy every time there was a change, that we just point back to this BPAR 1445 as the main source of information for response to immigration enforcement. And we feel that will be more efficient for you all as well as us, frankly. Next slide, please. So there are three major categories of changes based on the new bill, AB 495, and the revised AG model policy language, starting with information and documents. So previously, AB 699 prohibited district and COE staff from soliciting or collecting information about students about their immigration status or citizenship status, or of their family members. New law also prohibits, and it says to the extent practicable. So there are some exceptions, and I think an acknowledgement too that the federal government may have a different idea about how all of this works. But it does prohibit district and COE staff from disclosing or providing in writing, verbally, or any other manner to an employee or officer of an immigration agency education records about a student, their family. You can see here on the slide all of the information that they cannot provide without parent guardian written consent, or personnel records or any other confidential employee information. So that was not in prior bills, but they have expanded now, as I noted, to include protections for employees as well. And typically we already require a subpoena or some other legal document or the consent of an employee to turn over confidential employee personnel records, but some of them under various in particular, Public Records Act, judicial opinions is not considered private or confidential. So this now makes it private and confidential, all personnel records from immigration officers or employees. I'm not sure the distinction either, just I'll note, between an immigration officer or an immigration employee, but it is anyone who is employed by an immigration agency. Now, of course, there are exceptions, right? And I mentioned one of them, which is a subpoena. So if you get a valid subpoena, judicial warrant, or court order, then that may require those documents to be turned over, or if there's another state or federal law that applies, or if it's in order to administer a state or federally supported immigration or educational program. Sorry, I've got immigration on the brain. Then those are exceptions in this statute that you can turn over the information, whether it's about students or employees. So this is a really good time to consult legal counsel when you get a request for these kind of documents to determine whether there is an exception that applies. And all of this is included in 1445. Okay, next slide, please. Another change is how immigration officers can access students and school sites. So prior to AB 495, the Fourth Amendment did require a warrant for any law enforcement to enter a non-public area of a school. That's how it's been interpreted. And the Fourth Amendment is the search and seizure amendment. And that's been pretty standard law for decades and decades and decades, right? But of course, anyone can consent to entrance of law enforcement into their home or a non-public area of their workplace. Consent is an exception to the Fourth Amendment. And what Education Code 234.7 and the revised AG model policy does is it says you can't consent. Staff can only allow an immigration officer or employee access to a student or permission to enter any school-provided transportation or any non-public area of a district or COE facility with a valid subpoena, judicial warrant, or court order if the district is required to provide access or permission to enter by state or federal law, or if it's in order to administer a state or federally supported education program. That's the same exceptions for documents that we talked about in the last slide. But this is a change. Some folks have said this is just a reiteration of the Fourth Amendment, but it is stronger than that in that it's saying you cannot let them in unless you have one of these exceptions. So we previously had some more flexibility and didn't impose specific restrictions regarding immigration enforcement on campus. But now this is what the Education Code says. To date, this has not been challenged by the federal government, so it is good law and should be followed. And again, you want to consult your legal counsel because this is very technical, right? And you want to make sure that if they present you with a judicial subpoena, that it's valid. And it's very important to note that it says judicial subpoena and not administrative subpoena or administrative warrant, because ICE uses those to make arrests, and those do not meet the requirements of this statute. Okay, next slide. And then there is a requirement to inform the public. So previously, the statute required providing information to families, which is a handout from the AG, and the revised versions have some additional requirements that you post the Know Your Educational Rights document in all district and COE administrative buildings, on websites for the district and for each school. So prior, it was just you had to provide it. Now there's specific direction on where you have to post it, and you're required to share any other information regarding family safety, caregivers authorization affidavits and their applicability, and the importance of providing and updating emergency contact information. So all of that is included in 1445 so that you have those requirements. Next slide, please. And then we did include some information in the notes about this, and then did the policy this way. So one thing that the legislature does a lot is that we'll talk about school facilities without recognizing that there are some facilities with districts and COEs that are not schools. And that means your district office, or maybe it's your transportation site where your bus barn. And so we have interpreted the statute as including district property. And that is because Government Code 7285.1 prohibits district and COE staff from providing voluntary consent to immigration enforcement agent to enter any non-public area of a place of labor. So anywhere where you have employees working is also off limits and has to follow the same requirements as the education code, even though the education code only uses the term school. So we wanted to make sure we covered everything. So these rules apply to district property, not just school property where students are present. And that also tracks with the fact that it applies to employees now and not just students, these protections. And there is a note in the notes part of 1445 explaining this as well. And also, we also always include a reminder, and the AG has said this as well, and this is just good practice, is that you should not obstruct, interfere with, or otherwise impede an immigration officer, even if you think they are going above and beyond their legal authority to enter district and COE provided transportation, non-public areas of facilities, or where sponsored activity is occurring. Don't try to stop them. That is potentially fraught with legal liability, and it's too big of an ask of staff. So that has been our practical advice as far as what happens if they go into a non-public area without a warrant when they're not supposed to. All right. And it's not advice, by the way, just our practical thoughts. And then next slide, please. There was another bill, SB 98, which we've gotten some questions about as well, that requires this comprehensive school safety plan to include procedures specifically designed to notify parents and guardians and staff when there's immigration enforcement on a school site, when that's been confirmed. And this is included in AR 0450. It is not in the board policy, but we did include it in the administrative regulation. So you can look for it there. And then I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thanks so much, Kristin. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because we are running out of time for questions. So just to know, in the slide deck, there were other changes to BPAR 0450 Comprehensive Safety Plan, and they are here so you can see them. Some are related to SB 848, which I know is on the top of a lot of people's minds right now, and also related to AB 962. Please know, in terms of AB 962, it is on our radar that we do need to update again our mobile communication devices policy. Okay, next slide, please. So we also updated BPAR 1340, access to district records. And this slide really just shows what Kristin had explained, that in terms of the response to immigration enforcement, we basically are cross-referencing to 1445 for material in regard to access to district records, because then that information is in 1445. And then some other unrelated bills, AB 1004 and AB 370. And again, you'll have this slide deck, and of course could always ask questions through CSBA at policies or policy at csba.org. All right, next slide, please. So, and we did update BPAR 5125 student records, again, cross-reference to 1445, because that is where the applicable material now lies. Next slide, please. And some changes that were unrelated to immigration or response to immigration enforcement. Okay, next slide. And we updated BPAR and Exhibit 1 5125.1 release of directory information. And actually, we reviewed this one just to make sure. There were actually no changes to the BP or the regulation, just to the notes. We did add some cautionary language to the exhibit, and also made one change that was unrelated to response to immigration enforcement, and that dealt with AB 677, where there's an exception to the release of directory information. Okay, next slide, please. So we do have some questions about response to immigration enforcement. So the first two are pretty similar. Basically, basically which policies need to be uploaded for CDE. So, 1445, they want to know should all of the documents from the special packet be uploaded, or which policies. That kind of combines the two first
So
questions.
you should upload any policy that you revised in response to the bills that we referenced. And so AB 495 or AB 49, however you want to refer to it, and SB 98. And so if all that you changed were our samples that we published, then I would upload all of our samples. If you made changes to any of your other policies based on those changes, then you should upload those as well. So anything that was updated based on those statutes in the AG model policy should be uploaded, not just 1445.
Okay, thanks. Next question is just about timing. It looks like this district or county office has a board meeting once a month. They expect that the policies are going to be approved on March 2nd and they could upload on March 3rd. And will that be sufficient for CDE?
All I can say is that the deadline for them to be adopted under the statute is March 1st. That's a statutory requirement, and CDE has asked that they also be uploaded to their portal by March 1st. Otherwise, this is a question for your outside legal counsel.
Okay, and then the last question, which I'm not really sure exactly what it pertains to, because I know this could apply to a variety of situations, but it just says, do they have to have a judicial warrant?
So based on the statute, California law now requires a judicial warrant or one of the other exceptions for access to district sites and facilities and for access to student and employee records. So either a judicial warrant, a court order from a judge, a subpoena, a requirement to administer a federal program, or some other legal requirement. So there are multiple exceptions and you need to check with your legal counsel, but an administrative warrant for a search is not sufficient under, or to get documents is not sufficient under California law currently.
Okay, so that seems to be the questions for this section. So there are a couple others. Let's finish with we just have a couple other things. So let's go on to that and let's try to answer. We'll run a little bit late to try to answer. There's just a couple questions left. So this slide just shows the policies that were not covered in the webinar. And then we have a bunch of slides. Let's just go through them, Shay. Just so you know, these slides we can keep going through. So next slide. These slides are all going to just be showing what the main updates were to the policies that were not covered in the webinar, but which we did update as part of the February packet. Next slide, please. And we can keep running through. So you have this information with you and materials, you will receive it. Keep running through. And then one more bylaw. And there, okay, so we're almost time for our final questions. Next slide, please. So if you could please rate the webinar, we try our best to be helpful and we want to keep improving our services. So if you could please rate as either incredible, really helpful, good enough, barely okay, or not worth my time. And if you have any recommendations or feedback that could help us improve our webinars, please let us know. So we'll take just a few seconds and then we will look at the results. Okay, let's see what the results are. Okay, well, that's great. It looks like it was either really helpful, incredible, or good enough. So that's really good. And even with those, if you have any recommendations that can help us do our job better, please let us know. Next slide, please. So we're ready for the final Q&A. There's just a couple here. So are there any issues with board members having access to the CSBA communications? And I'm not sure, Kristin, you might have a better idea of what that question is referring to. If not, we might need to be in touch with the person asking to get a little more information.
Sorry. I'm not sure what that question pertains to. I think that's a conversation with the superintendent.
Okay. Okay. Another question is, will you update the conflict of interest soon? It is on our radar. Again, it's always hard to know exactly when. We have to prioritize. And as you can see, even from the questions that come in today, there are so many conflicting reasons to update policies, and we're getting more restrained with our timing based on mandated policies, policies that are going to be mandated, like through SB 848 and some other legislation. So it makes it more difficult for us to have the flexibility to update ones that don't have a mandated policy requirement. But it is on our radar, please know, and we'll be updating it in the future, the near future. The question about the handouts, yes, I said you'll have the webinar and the slide deck. You will receive that as a participant, somebody who attended, and the link to the webinar will be emailed. Yes, not sure the exact timing of when you will get it, but you will get it not too long. I think there were just a couple more questions. Dustin, you might be able to help with this one. It was from a different packet, so we might need to do a little further research. But it says, why does policy and regulation 1250, which is our visitors outsiders policy, not use the definition of outsider in Penal Code 627, which is the enabling statute for registration? Dustin, you can help me out, but I believe we felt like we wanted to err on the side of all visitors and outsiders in the policy as it's currently written. But do you recall, or do you feel like this is something we should research a little more?
Might be worth researching if they want to email, but I believe, yeah, I think we tried to be as inclusive as we could with that.
Yeah. Okay. So please either email policy@csba.org and or Dustin himself, and we will look into that if you need further information than that. Let me give a quick look over. And thank you for the feedback about deadlines for mandated policies. We'll look into that. And having the webinar a little earlier would have been helpful for some people with the March 1 deadline. Just some suggestions at the end. So thank you for all the general feedback. We will look into that and consider it. And thank you so much for spending the time with us and attending, and we hope you found it to be helpful. And thank you to all of the presenters.